so the way that this has gone about feels like there's a significant section of the U.S. elite that want this. And I want this for many different reasons. You guys outlined the economic reasons and some of the sort of more militarist reasons. Maybe I'll kick it back to Xiangyu, and Carl definitely jump in. Can we talk about the basis for the one China policy? Because this is what is angering China so much about this trip. They repeat, foreign ministry, Xi Jinping said it in his call to Joe Biden on the 28th, repeatedly talking about the one China principle, that this was something that the U.S. and China agreed to. It's international law. Basically, the United Nations recognizes this. Can you talk about the basis for this, and maybe in the most basic terms to begin, because you see some of the media chatter. You mentioned John Kirby, Carl's talking the way he was. You see U.S. politicians on both sides of the aisle, but especially on the Republican side, kind of not even pay attention to this. This is like very critical part of history. Could you talk about what the basis for this policy is? Why is it important? Why does China see this as its red line?
Any country has its red line and its own sovereignty thing. The thing that complicates the matter of the China issue is there, as you may know, there was a civil war in China that ended in 1949 with the remnants of the old government, which was the Republic of China, losing the rest of China, losing mainland China, and only having Taiwan, Jinmen and Mazu are two islands off of the coast of on the other side of the Taiwan Strait. And the thing is, both governments agree that there is one China. They just disagree on what that China is. Now, obviously, this claim that the so-called Republic of China is a legitimate government of all of China is no longer actively pursued and hasn't been taken seriously since 1980. But it's kept there because it is a point of unity between the Taipei and the Beijing, the Taipei administration and the Beijing government. The point of unity is, hey, we're one family, we have a disagreement, but our point of unity is this is one country. And some people in the West might have this understanding, saying, oh, this means like Taipei is like reactionary because, well, it is, but not for this reason. Because it's like it's claiming all of China when it only controls this, so it's the aggressor. Actually, from the perspective of Beijing, if the administration on Taipei drops the claims over the mainland, then it sees it as a move towards a formalization of a two-China situation or a Taiwan independence situation, which to Beijing is the same thing. But funnily enough, in Taiwan, two China and Taiwan independence mean different things, but they're still fundamentally the same. So how is Taiwan a part of China? Well, I mean, it became integrated into China and formally and during the Qing Dynasty, like long before the United States ever existed. So and and the fact that Taiwan has been estranged from the mainland for a few decades is a drop in the bucket in Chinese history, because like we think of history like in centuries and like out of 5,000 years. So Taiwan was returned to Japan like this. Oh, well, Taiwan was ceded to Japan in 1895 following the defeat of the Sino-Japanese War, and Japan was defeated in 1945, and it had to agree to the terms of the 1943 Cairo Declaration, which reads, all the territories of Japan that have been stolen from Chinese, such as Manchuria, Formosa, which is Taiwan, the Pescadores, which is Penghu, shall be restored to the Republic of China. An excerpt from the 1945 Potsdam Declaration. Japanese sovereignty shall be limited to the islands of Honshu, Hokkaido, Kyushu, Shikoku, and such minor islands as we determine. Now, Japan's instrument of surrender. I promise I'll be brief with this. We hereby undertake for the Emperor, the Japanese government, and their successors to carry out the provisions of the Potsdam Declaration in good faith. And there's an argument that these are among Taiwan separatists, that these are just communiques and not actual treaties. But the instrument of surrender was included in Volume 59 of the United States Statutes at Large, published in 1946, and in Volume 139 of the UN Treaty Series issued in 1952. So therefore, the instrument of surrender, which references both the Cairo and Potsdam declarations, is a legally binding document as far as the UN, the US, Japan, and China are concerned. So this is a legal basis. Now, because of the Civil War, and the fact that Korea was also, there was also two contending governments in Korea. China and Korea were excluded from the Treaty of San Francisco in 1951 because of the Civil War, because they were in states of civil war. This was by design by the U.S. And you might think, oh, 1951, that's after the Chinese Civil War ended in 1949. Well, there was no treaty or anything at the end of 1949. 1949 is just the declaration of the People's Republic of China. Back then it was still not really certain what would happen, especially with the Korean War going on and all that. But anyways, Treaty of San Francisco, Japan renounces all right, title, and claim to Formosa and the Pescadores, and the treaty was signed in September of 1951, effective in April 28th, 1952. And since the treaty does not explicitly state anything beyond Japan surrendering Taiwan and Penghu, the separatists claim that the status of Taiwan is legally undetermined, while arguing that the Cairo and Potsdam declarations are not legally binding. But while China was excluded from the Treaty of San Francisco, the U.S. basically made Japan conclude a separate treaty with the so-called Republic of China government on Taiwan, namely the Treaty of Taipei. And note that it was signed on April 28th, 1952, which is the same date that the Treaty of San Francisco came into effect. So it's kind of like, we're going to exclude you from the Treaty of San Francisco, but include this separate treaty with the government that we do recognize, because the U.S. recognized the so-called Republic of China on Taiwan as the legal government of all of China until, I believe, 1979, January 1st, 1979. So the U.S. has actually, in the UN too, they have always recognized one China. It's just their definition of China has just changed from Taipei to Beijing. So one China is nothing new, especially ever since the Cold War, especially ever since the mainland and Taiwan were governed separately. The world has still recognized one China, just with differing definitions of one China. Article 2 of the Treaty of Taipei, basically, just saying that Japan renounces all rights to whatever, and and also Article 10 of the Treaty of Taipei, it stipulates that the former inhabitants of Taiwan and Penghu and their descendants are Chinese. Well, Republic of China, but still Chinese, in accordance to the laws which have been enforced by the Republic of China in Taiwan and Penghu. And so legally, the people who are on Taiwan are no longer Japanese citizens. There's another point of confusion. There's conspiracy theorists who think that all this stuff is happening because Japanese people stayed behind. No, nearly all the Japanese people went back to Japan. If you have any questions on that, you can ask me later. So whether or not you believe Taiwan is a part of China is one thing, but it goes to show that in regards to this issue, China is abiding by international law, while the U.S. is violating it. When it kind of flirts with Taiwan separatism, it doesn't even go out and fully support Taiwan separatism. So and you can see the theory of undetermined status of Taiwan is a result of a very selective interpretation of all these various treaties. And now
for all the people who claim that Taiwan is a country, is an independent country, etc., point me to a country that recognized Taiwan as a country, and or point me to the Taiwan's own declaration of independence. Show me the statement. The Taiwan government has never declared independence of Taiwan. Right. Never. So, and there is no international law. There is no formal treaty recognize Taiwan as its own country. So there you go. This is.
In fact, when constitutional reforms happened at the turn of the century in Taiwan, there were these constitutional amendments, and the preamble to it says basically these are it was basically done to restore bourgeois democracy without waiting for reunification first, because the justification in the past for martial law and the suspension of democracy was, okay, our country is not reunified and most of the territory is not under our control. Well, if you want to, the people and after the liberal opposition to the KMT, the liberal reforms happened, and they needed to like kind of codify it into law. So then there were these additional amendments that made it like allowed, and the preamble starts with these articles are to like meet the requirements of our country prior to reunification. So even the Constitution of the so-called Republic of China, which I guess people call the Taiwanese Constitution, does not recognize Taiwan as a country. In fact, it's a pro-reunification constitution. It's just the DPP doesn't really. It's strange because the DPP came to power as part of it emerged from the liberal opposition to the KMT, and Taiwan's separatism has. I mean, there are some grassroots elements, but the fact that most people that a lot of the youth kind of like are indifferent or buy into it is a result of a carefully and socially engineered top-down thing. Also taking advantage of the fact that the KMT did have its successes in the past and did mishandle the internal contradictions of Taiwanese society and all of that. So
Yeah.
but then people are like, well, the Republic of China exists on Taiwan, so it's still like its own separate country. Well, both, as we mentioned, both of the constitutions operate under a one China framework, and the PRC views itself as the successor state of the ROC. So legally, from the perspective of Beijing, Taiwan and other territories controlled by Taipei constitute a renegade region of the republic, but are nonetheless by law a part of the PRC. It's just the reasoning is okay. Well, it's a result of the Civil War. It's an internal issue. It's like you have a renegade region, and it's like we can just kind of let it chill there until we feel like resolving it. Now
this is why the Shanghai Communique signed in 1971 between Nixon and Zhou Enlai is so important and forms the foundation of the Sino-American relationship ever since, because the communique recognized Taiwan issue is an issue to be resolved by Chinese people on the both sides of the Taiwan Strait. It recognizes internal Chinese matter. Now, there are a lot of people today who say, oh, Shanghai Communique is not a law, it's not a U.S. law. Sure, technically you are correct. But Shanghai Communique, which is signed by the President of the United States, this forms a mutual understanding for paving the Sino-American relationship onwards. This is how U.S. and China finally normalized relationship in 1979, and U.S. shifted its recognition from the government on Taipei to the government in Beijing. Is that Taiwan issue is an issue to be settled among Chinese people themselves, and right now what U.S. has done in the last several years is in clear violation in spirit of the Shanghai Communique. Now, on contrast to this long-standing understanding between U.S. and China that built a firm foundation upon the Sino-American relationship was built upon. Now, U.S. is challenging that. U.S. is saying no. Now, Taiwan is a opportunity for us to use as a palm, as a chip, to stop the rise of China, because that's what is really about. U.S. for all its rhetoric, U.S. and he's a politician. I would even say most people in U.S. don't give a shit about Taiwan. Most people in U.S. wouldn't even be able to tell the difference between Taiwan and Thailand.
Oh, you're from Taiwan.
Right?